All right, everybody, and my name is Tyler Scott. Welcome to lesson 3.1, micro and macro units markets. Obviously, I'm the owner of Scott Family Real Estate, and this is DIY Home Valuation Mastery. And one more here, I'm let it slide out. Instructor myself. All right. So you probably know who I am. You know what we're going through here. Congratulations on making it this far. I know it can be a little testing at times to sit on a video and try to learn for yourself, but I'm sure that you're picking things up. By the end of lesson 3, and all sub-lessons, 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, you will know effectively how to do a valuation report on a home for residential. So let's get started. All right, our lesson agenda, we're going to go over micro market analysis for real estate valuation, macro market analysis for real estate valuation, and some case studies, valuation, and diverse market conditions. All right, let's get right into it. I'm going to move a little bit faster here so I don't waste your time. Micro market analysis for real estate valuation. Defining micro markets and their characteristics. So definition of a micro market. Micro markets refer to specific geographic areas or neighborhoods with distinct economic and social dynamics. Unique demand-supply dynamics. Each micro market has unique demand and supply characteristics influencing local value and opportunities. Demographic profiles. Demographics vary across micro markets, affecting preferences and market behavior. Localized value assessment. Understanding micro markets will allow precise assessment of localized value fluctuations and trends. So why is this so important? We'll get into that a little bit more, but as you developed your home type, you've done your sketches, you've done your quality rating, your condition rating, you understand these things, you've created your boundary for where the home, where the neighborhood is, in which you're going to find other comparable homes. Now you need to find what's called a micro market. Now there's two types of micro markets in the world that I've worked in. Micro markets could be just that neighborhood. Micro markets could be, anything to, it could be like say for a city region. It could be several counties wide, right? That's could be a micro market, or it could be farther. A micro market could be, well, I've got a bunch of ranches and I've got a bunch of colonials, and the colonials are selling lower than the ranches within the same market area. Okay, and then I would define that as a micro market where ranches are selling specifically more than very comparable and even on the same street colonials. And you see this in every neighborhood that they're in. So you develop this micro market. That way allows you to do adjustments, which we'll go over in the next lesson, about how to adjust for home type and other things of that nature. So micro and macro markets are extremely important to understand, so you can get very accurate adjustments. Therefore, you can make very accurate valuations on your home, so you can be as accurate as possible to a potential appraisal, so you don't waste your time, you don't lose money, and you know how to do what you need to do. Analyzing local supply and demand factors. Comparable properties availability. The number of similar properties available influences market competition and prices at the local level. Right? Supply and demand. Recent sales impact. Recent property sales provide benchmarks that affect current property valuation and market trends. What they mean is, as an appraiser, if I appraise a home in an urban area, I'm going to use 365 days worth of sales, typically. Unless it's a fast-moving market like New York City or Los Angeles, which I am not in those areas, but let's say, I believe we talked about this before. I'm sorry, I keep wanting to burp. That's why I keep patting my chest. I'm like, what's going on here? Anyway, so you don't want to touch that. So recent sales can be our big factor here. Rental rates influence. It's a big one. Current rental prices reflect demand and help determine the investment value of properties in the area. Now, I'm not covering investment properties in this lesson, in this course at all. It is very likely that I'll create another course designed just for investment properties. But for now, I'm just mentioning it to you. Market absorption rates, the rate at which properties sell or rent affects supply demand balance and price stability locally. If homes sit for a long time, it's going to affect the prices. If rent prices sit for a long time, traditionally it would sit for, it would bring prices down. However, we're not seeing that. I'm going to go a little political on you here. This is where large corporations, large hedge funds, large buyers, even local buyers have been doing it for years, have what seem to be an unlimited amount of cash flow, or assets to utilize, to leverage, to buy homes. I know people in my area who've bought over 140 homes in a geographic area within a couple county area. Just this year, one or two individuals are putting those kind of numbers up, while the average person can't afford to buy a home. They have to save up for years at a time just for one home. One guy's buying 20 to 30 a month, right? And that's where we see where if you own, let's say you own 100 rental properties and they all were within one market area, and you've got a 70% occupancy rate at a high rate. Well, then you've got 30 homes, right? That means 30 homes are sitting vacant. And you might have them marked up a little bit higher to match your 70% high rental rates. Now, let's say people don't want to do it. Maybe they let it sit longer. They can afford to let it sit longer. They can afford to let it sit there because that 70% occupancy is paying their bills, paying their profit, paying all of that stuff, and paying for the ones sitting off the market. If you're a local landlord, which I have been, where you sit on one or two units or one or two rentals, you can't afford to let that sit, so you got to bring it down. But these large corporations who own 2,000 homes, like there was a corporation a few years ago in 2023, the last time I saw, owned 2,200 homes in the Columbus area. That means they can essentially fix the market for rental rates, which when I say market absorption rates, which properties sell or rent affects supply and demand, the rate. Well, that wouldn't affect, the absorption rates won't happen here. They won't happen here in that scenario because as long as they're making money on the majority of properties, they don't need to bring the price down on the rest of them. They can let it sit higher and then make more profit, and they're still building equity. So that's a little politics for you, but let's move on. I didn't mean for that. Assessing neighborhood level and influences on value. Neighborhood quality. The overall condition and maintenance of a neighborhood strongly affect buyer interest and property values. What does this mean? If you go to a neighborhood and there's bars along the windows, right? There's spray painting on homes. There's homes look like they burnt down or boarded up, and you're going to go to that home and you think, oh, well, if I compare this home to another neighborhood, well, let's say it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, a traditional 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Let's say it's a traditional style, I don't know, let's say colonial, 3-bedroom, 2, and then you compare that to a 3-bedroom, 2 within a mile radius. Well, let's say, a quarter of a mile away is a big highway. On the other side of that highway, you go, and this is, I'm talking about urban area, you go another 3/4 of a mile, keep going. You're like, well, that's within a mile radius, and all of them are there, but that could be a completely different neighborhood. Right? That could be very, very different. And so you're not doing yourself any justice. You're not doing anybody any justice by evaluating a home without doing the proper considerations. So neighborhood quality is a 100% a proper, consideration. Local amenities such as parks, schools, shopping centers enhance desirability and influence pricing. I know where I'm at, schools are huge, right? Especially in my county. We've got high-ranking schools, we've got low-ranking schools, and they share borders. So why pay more? Yeah, you could pay a little bit less for a home in one district, but you might pay more taxes. You might get less results, especially if you have kids. And most home buyers, single-family home buyers that aren't corporations, typically involve kids, right? They have some sort of kids when they're buying. Now, I know that's a little bit different. Like I said, we're in a different market now. I think last year in Ohio, we had 60% of our single-family home buyers were between the ages of 51 and 79. Well, this is a market we've never seen before. We're essentially seeing a two-tier market. People who have equity and can afford large down payments or can afford homes like that or people who can't compete with the starter home prices because the starter home prices are being bought out by different hedge funds and corporations. So you have to find a above average home with essentially no ability to build equity, and you have to be prepared for that with the interest rate that it has. But local amenities are extremely important here. Parks, shopping centers, all that adds to value. Accessibility factors. I'm so sorry. I keep going off on these little tangents. It's a different kind of night. All right, accessibility factors. Good transport links and ease of access to major hubs are critical in determining neighborhood value, especially so in big cities. Now, rural cities, rural towns, that's not going to matter. What they're talking about is bus stops, train stops, that can affect things. Socioeconomic conditions, economic status, and demographic factors shape buyer preferences and market prices locally, right? Is one particular community on an uptick? Do they have job availabilities? Do they have high wages? Does another one have low wages, low job opportunities? Lower. The best way to look at this is to simply find the average household income, right, for a neighborhood or for a town or whatever, and then look at comparable towns and then see what the other ones are looking at that border that particular town or city or neighborhood. And then once you find, okay, how it compares to its direct neighbors, then you can start saying, okay, where it stands economically. Is it more, you can't say the word desirable, but is it more appealing to a buyer to buy in this neighborhood because of the socioeconomic decision? So all of this goes into a property description when you're discussing why you gave the values that you did or why you used the comparisons that you did. And we'll go over that in the next 2 lessons. Man, I said I was gonna make this fast, didn't I? But I am not. Macro market analysis for real estate valuation. Overview of macroeconomic factors affecting real estate. So micro can be as small as a couple streets. It could be as large as a city area. Macro is huge, right? That's where like the state of Iowa, or it's like a state size area, or like, because I'm from Ohio, let's say the state of Ohio, or the Midwest, or Northeast United States. Right, those are, or the entire United States. That's macroeconomic factors. GDP growth signals economic health, directly impacting real estate demand and investment opportunities. So if I'm looking at a macro market for Ohio and for buyers for Ohio, let's say I looked at my micro, how about the Ohio as an overall? I want to see what the growth is here within the last year, 2 years, whatever. Are people buying more? People selling more? This won't have a large influence unless we go into a major depression or you have something like the 2008 bubble burst. However, most things, the macroeconomic factors, the biggest one you're going to look at is interest rates. That's going to be your biggest one. Interest rates, job growth, GDP growth, investments, all within the state of Ohio or within the state area, if I'm going the state of Ohio route, or the Midwest, or the United States in total. Interest rates influence, like I just said, interest rates, inflation, and pricing. Inflation rates are huge. Employment policies, employment levels, and government policies that influence market regulation are very, very big. Are they pulling back the red tape on building, or are they putting more red tape on building? Is it slowing construction down? Is construction giving less and less and less? Is it taking them longer to build? These are some macroeconomic things that will affect your real estate market. The impact of national and regional trends, urbanization effects. Now, I'm bringing this up to you. It will not be overly essential for what you need to do on the valuation report. However, as you develop yourself as a valuator, or maybe you're just doing this for yourself, or maybe you're a real estate agent looking to get better at this, what we do without becoming, spending thousands of dollars and thousands of hours on being an appraiser. This is extremely important stuff. Urbanization effects, right? urbanization increases demand for housing and commercial properties, leading to market growth in cities. Now, nothing we're talking about in this lesson affects commercial properties or is talking about commercial properties. Commercial valuation is an extremely different animal, so don't even begin to go down that rabbit hole, unless, of course, I put out a lesson on it. But I don't even know if I can do commercial valuations without diving into commercial appraising, which most appraisers don't do. I have done, but most appraisers don't do. It's extremely complicated and extremely complex. So, population growth impact. Rising population drives higher real estate demand. Now, I've actually seen an example of this where this doesn't. It drives lower demand. I don't know how it happens. Like I saw this, it was the school system. There was a community that was growing in population, but their prices were decreasing and their demand for housing was decreasing. I was like, well, how is that possible? Well, they had the lowest ranking school completely surrounded by higher ranking schools. So people were moving in, or people were moving there. Their population was growing itself, but for some reason, I believe the schools, they weren't, the prices of properties weren't increasing. People didn't want to live there, right? And so they were living there because they had to, not because they wanted to. And that's where you see a scenario like that. But 95 times out of 100, rising population drives higher real estate demand, affecting pricing and development patterns regionally. Infrastructure development, new roads, transit, utilities boost property values and expand market accessibility. If a city government or a county government decides on a huge development in one city or another, that brings in jobs, that brings in revenue, that brings in entertainment, that brings in amenities. Get used to saying the word amenities. Then that can drive up real estate costs, real estate demand. Absolutely. Economic shifts influence. Regional economic changes shape real estate trends by altering investment and demand dynamics. Typically, when you see an economic shift, you usually see it on the switch for a macro market. Let's see. When it talks about national and regional trends, usually you're talking about in economic shifts influence. You're seeing the difference in typically an election takes place. Right? An election in which you go from a Democrat to a Republican to Democrat, vice versa. A change in power, which is a change in shifts, economic policies, economic influences. This can affect real estate every bit, just like the stock market affects the stock market. Because like the stock market, the real estate world is all based on demand and based on supply, and it's based on buyers, right? So just keep an eye out for that. But we're still in the macro, right? That's what affects macro. Integration of macro data into valuation models. Role of macroeconomic data provides insights into economic cycles that directly impact property values. Economic forecasts help predict future property value changes by anticipating market shifts and policy effects. Once again, we just kind of talked about this. Policy impact analysis. Evaluating policy changes allows valuation models to adjust for regulatory impacts on the property market. Now, let's say, for example, and I'm not being political one way or another, I'm saying what I saw on the news the other day. I know that Donald Trump's tariffs essentially were claiming by farmers out in the like Iowa, Kansas, they're claiming they can't compete with foreign soybeans because foreign soybeans had such a large tariff on them to China that China now outsourced it and is getting their soybeans from Argentina. Therefore, a lot of the farmers out west aren't able to ship off and sell their soybeans, right? This is an example of tariffs, right, on a macro level and policy impact affecting the economics. So if you're looking for farms in that area, it's driving down farm prices on a macro level, even though it's hitting them regionally. That region was relying upon that macro policy. Okay. Case studies and valuation in diverse market conditions. Valuation strategy. So rising market valuation. In rising markets, valuation focuses on anticipating future growth and potential opportunities for expansion. So as you look into your market valuation, when you look at your micro and macro markets, declining, right? Declining. increasing, right? If we are growing, you got to look into the future. It's just telling you to look into the future. Declining market valuation. During declining markets, conservative estimates and thorough risk assessments are essential. So if we're in a declining market, don't start looking at where it could be 2-3 months in the future. Keep it as tight and as close to that date of valuation as possible. In a rising market, you have a little more flexibility to look and see the growing trends and maybe give a valuation a month or 2 or 3 ahead of time. Obviously, that's where you say, you put a disclaimer in there and say, these are not as of current date. Effective date of your valuation is extremely important for this reason. I could do one, let's say July 1st. And I'm looking at, well, July 1st is a hot summer market, not hot as in heat, but hot as in there's a lot of buying going on, there's a lot of selling going on, and if I do it for July 1st, it's going to look a whole lot different than October 1st. So if I want to do a valuation for October 1st for someone who's looking to sell October 1st, I would have to, one, use historically the last 3 to 4 years of any shifts between July 1st and October 1st, and then average that out to see what our current growth trend is. So if we're growing by 5% a month, let's just say we are, and so July, August, September, that's 15% up, an increase in price. That's what our current trend is on. However, right, if my 5-year or 3-year historical analysis of trends comes back and says within that 3-year gap it actually declines by 2%, so then I'll do the 15% growth rate, subtract the 2, subtract the 2, subtract the 2, right, which leaves me at about a 9% growth rate between July. So I would tell them, hey, you're still going to grow based on our current trends, but you're not going to grow as fast as we have been growing because it will slow down based upon my historical models. And I'm saying that as a very, very vague example. Obviously, a lot of things contribute to that. Whether I'm looking at the micro market, I would look at the micro market for that. But you likely won't be dealing with trends as an evaluator, as you evaluate a home or your home or any other home. Very, very rare that you would need that. Adapting methodologies for residential versus commercial properties. Okay, so I'm just going to mention this to you. I'm not going to try to teach you this in depth. I'm mentioning it so you have an understanding. Differences in valuation criteria. Residential and commercial properties require distinct valuation methods based on usage and market demand. They're completely different things. For example, if I am valuating or appraising a commercial property that is an ice cream shop, it is completely different sale, completely different usage than a residential home. If I'm most likely, if I'm appraising a strip mall that rents out and leases out spaces for local businesses or whatever, or other companies, I'm looking at price per square foot, rental rate, and gross rent margin, GRM. However, you're not going to obviously use a price per square foot in residential. Now, I said obviously because a lot of people think, well, yeah, you do, because they mention it. You don't. No one uses price per square foot for residential because that makes no sense. I could have a home that is, let's say, 2,000 square feet at $100 a square foot, right? And then the next home to the left of it could be 4,000 square feet. But because they're right next to each other, and they offer very similar amenities, and they're a similar neighborhood, and I mean, it is the same neighborhood, same amenities, everything else is the same, the size is different. Someone's not going to pay twice the amount for a 4,000 square foot as they would for that 2,000 square foot. They're not going to do it. They're going to say, because your economic output goes, people are not willing to pay those certain prices. So likely a larger home you'll pay less per square foot than you would a smaller home in the same neighborhood. You'll pay more per square foot. Market dynamic variations. Market factors affect residential, commercial properties differently, influencing pricing and investment. I'm going to move through this. Effective valuation requires emphasizing income potential for commercial and location suitability for residential properties. Once again, I'm just kind of mentioning this to you, so if you ever think that maybe you want to look at commercial, or why is some sort of commercial property affecting my residential property, I'm putting this in here as saying they're extremely different. Don't attempt to compare the two. It's not going to work. But I do bring it up because if you are looking at your macro or micro markets, commercial properties and commercial valuations, commercial trends can affect the economic growth of a community, which can affect the residential growth of the community. So I'm not teaching you how to do commercial. I'm simply stating to you it's important to pay attention to commercial for your residential valuation. All right, lessons learned from real-world valuation challenges. Data limitations impact. Limited or incomplete data creates challenges in producing accurate and reliable valuations in real-world scenarios. So the less data you collect, the less accurate you will be. That's what that means. That's what I'm telling you here. Market volatility effects. Frequent fluctuations in market conditions require adaptive valuation methods to maintain credibility, right? So up, down. When I just mentioned a couple slides prior to this, make sure you're looking at historical trends. If you have, especially in market volatility, right? If you've got steady growth for 2-3 years, maybe trends don't, that is your trend. If you've got up 1 year, down the next year, up 1 year, down the next year, that's volatile. Or up 1 month, down the next month, down the next month, down the next month, up again, that's volatile, right? So you've got to be aware of that. Regulatory change adaptation, always continue to learn and be flexible, as that is essential to comply with evolving regulations affecting valuations. And that could be mainly zoning, that could be construction methods, construction requirements. That's, of course, if you're in the real estate world and you're learning from me here and you want to continue your evaluation process. However, if you're an average Joe out there or an average Jane looking to do a one-off, I guess you don't need to stay as continuous in the learning. Conclusion, we went over a foundational valuation principles, market analysis importance, and data-driven techniques. So this is a little more vague. I just wanted to explain to you micro and macro markets so you understand them. You will likely be in a scenario where you will say, oh, I'm starting to notice a trend. And that trend is likely micro. And if it's not micro, let's say you have a trend for the entire state of Ohio, the entire state of California, or hey, I'm noticing a trend across the United States. Maybe you work in real estate already. Maybe you work for a larger real estate firm and you do sales in multiple states. Macro is extremely important. Policy, everything. Understanding the bigger picture and what's affecting the housing market will help you understand and sell much, much faster. I don't care who you are. If you are trying to sell a property for 15-20% over its potential valuation or appraisal, but we're not doing that, but evaluation, what its value is, and you sell one every 3 months, you're not as effective as a seller who's going to sell for the original price 10 to 15, maybe 20% lower, but you're selling every single month. So getting the correct value here is extremely important. Not trying to find that one-off buyer or take advantage of that one-off sale, but trying to turn over more sales for more frequent movement to increase the market. That's extremely important for what we do. I see a lot of real estate agents, they're looking for the top dollar. And they're trying to make top dollar on every deal. And they're stagnating the market. They're telling buyers or they're telling sellers that they can get prices that they probably can't, or that they would need someone to come up with an absorbent amount, a ridiculous amount of down payment on. What you don't want, if it's priced right, it will get multiple offers and they will get into a bidding war and it will drive itself up. If it's priced wrong, it's going to drive itself down. You're going to have to make concessions. You may not get the price you're looking for as if it was someone who is in a bidding war, right? You want the bidding war. I'm not saying shortcut yourself. I'm saying value it properly. and you'll help the entire economy and yourself. So, but my name is Tyler Scott. I own Scott Family Real Estate. This is DIY Home Valuation Mastery. I will see you all at lesson 3.2. Thank you so much.